Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The ink wasn't even dry on the divorce papers when Mark looked over at me with that smug, hollow little smile. The kind of grin people wear when they think they've won something big, like a trophy or a lottery ticket, except this time the prize was my life, my house, my dignity, and every damn cent we ever saved together. I sat across from him in that cold courthouse room, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead like a bad omen, watching as he shook hands with his attorney like they'd just closed a real estate deal and not dismantled 15 years of marriage. He didn't even have the decency to glance at me as I gathered my bag and coat, just sat there, straightening his tie like the show was over and he was headed to the after party. I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but a cheap leather purse, a bruised heart, and the faint echo of my own footsteps reminding me I was officially alone. No home, no money, no safety net. Just $32 in my checking account and a crumpled parking ticket I'd gotten while trying to run in late to court that morning. And right there on the courthouse steps, as if the universe hadn't spit in my face enough already, I saw her, Amanda, my so-called best friend since college. The one who used to drink wine with me on my porch and cry about her shitty boyfriends. And now? She was wearing one of my old blouses, the silk one I loved, the one Mark swore he never saw after the move, and she was clinging to his arm like a damn victory flag. She looked at me and smirked, then leaned in and kissed him right on the cheek. Just like that. Like she hadn't sat at my kitchen table 6 months earlier, swearing she'd never betray me, swearing she'd never cross that line. That was the moment I knew I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd lost every illusion I ever had about loyalty, friendship, and what the hell forever really meant. I got in my car, my rusted, dented old sedan that he tried to fight me for in court, as if he needed to win that too, and sat in the driver's seat for 15 full minutes before I could even turn the key. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to press my palms against the steering wheel to stop them. That kind of shaking doesn't come from cold. It comes from watching your life crack open like glass on pavement while people you used to love stand around laughing. I drove to the only place I could afford, the ragged old guest room at my cousin's house. It smelled like old carpet and broken promises, but it had a door I could close and a bed I didn't have to fight for. That night, I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, wondering how the hell I ended up here. Just weeks before, I had a kitchen with a bay window, a joint savings account, and a man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. Now I was lying on a mattress with a spring poking my back, trying not to cry loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But what cut deeper than anything else was what happened a few nights later at dinner. My sister Erica invited me to what she called a family catch-up, but it turned out to be a performance, one where I was the joke and everyone else played audience. My father, bless his ignorant heart, raised his glass halfway through the meal and said, "Well, maybe next time, don't marry a man smarter than you." My mother laughed politely, my uncle coughed into his napkin, and Erica just kept sipping her wine like none of it mattered. Like I was being overly sensitive. Like getting gutted in court and abandoned by your entire support system was just another chapter in a soap opera. That was the night I realized I was well and truly alone. No one was coming to save me. Not my sister, not my parents, and sure as hell not the people who used to call me friend. And yet, strangely enough, there was something quietly liberating about that realization. When there's nothing left to lose, you start looking at the world differently. You stop asking for permission. You stop apologizing for your tears. You stop caring if people think you're broken. I went back to that little guest room, pulled my old laptop from the bottom of my suitcase, and flipped it open. The screen flickered to life like it hadn't been touched in years, and maybe it hadn't. But I didn't care. I stared at that blank desktop for a long while, then opened a new file. I didn't know what I was about to build, not yet, but I knew this much: whatever came next, it was going to come from me. Not from Mark. Not from Amanda. Not from my spineless family or their smug little dinner toasts. It was going to come from the fire they left me in. And I was damn well going to rise from it. I thought once the dust settled, I'd get a fair shot at rebuilding, maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, but something deep down still believed in decency, in fairness, in people showing up when you've hit rock bottom and need a hand to climb back up. But the truth hit harder than any courtroom verdict ever could. The world doesn't give a damn about broken women, and people love a good fall, especially when it's not theirs. It was like the moment I walked out of that courthouse, the label slapped onto my forehead in bold, invisible ink, damaged goods. I saw it in the way people looked at me during job interviews, how their eyes flickered with pity or suspicion, how they smiled politely when I spoke but never called me back. I saw it in the way old colleagues suddenly stopped responding to emails, how even the friendliest ones somehow forgot I ever existed. And it wasn't just in the silence, it was in the whispers too. The rumors spread faster than wildfire in a dry summer. Mark had gone around telling people I'd lost my mind, that I'd been unstable for years, that I'd drained his bank account and tried to sabotage his business. He told one of our mutual friends that I was emotionally erratic and completely unhireable. And you know what? People believed him. Because it's easier to believe a woman snapped than to admit a man lied. It's easier to paint me as bitter and vengeful than to acknowledge that maybe I just got fucked over. And once that narrative sticks, it's nearly impossible to scrub off. Even my own sister, Erica, God, I still can't get over that one, sat me down in her kitchen one afternoon, acting like she was doing me a favor, and said, "Claire, maybe it's time to stop aiming so high. Maybe you need to lower your standards. Take what you can get, you know." As if being broken by divorce meant I was no longer allowed to expect anything decent from life. As if my worth had been reduced to what scraps I could scavenge off the floor. And the worst part? She said it like she was being helpful, like she truly thought she was guiding me with love and realism, but all I heard was her echoing every cruel thing I'd already been told about myself. That I should settle. That I wasn't worth anything more. And I wonder, have you ever had everyone around you act like your pain was your fault? Like you deserved it? Like somehow your suffering made people uncomfortable enough to justify walking away? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know if I'm the only one who's ever sat in a room full of people who claimed to care and felt more invisible than a shadow on the wall. So I started picking up whatever work I could find, because rent still had to be paid and my pride couldn't fill a fridge. I waited tables at a diner where teenagers snapped their fingers at me and called me ma'am, like I was some relic from a past they never lived through. I scrubbed floors in office buildings after hours, walking past rows of desks where people typed away in jobs I'd applied for and never even got interviews. I folded towels in a gym locker room that smelled like sweat and Lysol, pretending not to hear the conversations about vacations, promotions, new homes, and shiny, happy lives. And all the while, Mark was out there flaunting his new life on social media, posting selfies from his brand new house, grinning next to his new car, tagging Amanda in posts about their couple's weekend retreat. It was like he wanted to make sure I saw it, like he needed to rub it in every time I logged in to distract myself from the nothingness of my current life. And still, I kept pushing. I kept sending out resumes, kept showing up with a smile, kept pretending that I wasn't unraveling inside from the sheer weight of feeling so forgotten. There were days I came home so exhausted I couldn't even cry, just collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking this couldn't be all there was left for me. But something strange started happening beneath the despair. In the quiet hours between scrubbing bathroom tiles and sorting coffee orders, a small idea began to take root. It wasn't even fully formed yet, just a flicker, a restless thought born from frustration and necessity. A pattern I kept noticing, a gap in the system, a need that no one was filling. At first, I dismissed it. Who was I to start anything? What the hell did I know about business? But that flicker wouldn't go away. It followed me into sleep, popped up in conversations, even showed up in my dreams. It was like some part of my brain, the part they hadn't yet managed to crush, was trying to remind me that I still had something left to give, something that didn't involve scrubbing toilets or pretending to laugh at rude customers' jokes. One night, as I sat on the edge of the bed peeling dried dish soap off my hands, it hit me harder than any insult or rejection ever could. Maybe I'd been trying to claw my way back into the world that had already kicked me out. Maybe I didn't need to be invited back in. Maybe I needed to build something new, something mine, something no one could ever take from me again. And that was the first time in a long time I felt something close to hope. Not joy, not confidence, not yet, but a quiet, dangerous little hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story after all. The first time I sat down to write out a plan for what would eventually become my first business, I did it at a kitchen table that wobbled every time I touched it, with the sound of my neighbor's TV leaking through the paper-thin apartment walls and a half-eaten bowl of cold instant ramen sitting next to my laptop. It wasn't some glossy, Instagram-worthy startup story, and there sure as hell wasn't a vision board or a bottle of champagne waiting in the fridge to celebrate my brilliant idea. There was just me, a woman scraping by, barely sleeping, barely holding it together, typing between shifts and drinking instant coffee so bitter it felt like punishment. But in that tiny apartment with chipped tile floors and a view of a dumpster, something started to grow that no one, not even I, saw coming. I'd noticed something during all those odd jobs, all those hours spent hustling just to keep the lights on. Every small business I worked in was struggling with this same damn problem. They didn't have the resources to compete with the big players, and every so-called solution on the market was either overpriced, overcomplicated, or completely out of touch with what these owners actually needed. I'd listen to the frustration in their voices, hear how they were drowning in logistics, marketing confusion, poor customer retention, and general chaos, but no one wanted to help them unless they had tens of thousands to spend. I didn't have a fancy MBA, but I had a brain, I had drive, and I had years of lived experience organizing systems, streamlining operations, and fixing what other people had broken. And so, one night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning building a rough website, offering small-scale business consulting. Cheap, efficient, straight-to-the-point help for the little guys who were being ignored. At first, no one came. For days, the only hits on my website were probably from me refreshing the page to make sure it hadn't disappeared. But eventually, a bakery down the street reached out. The owner, Carla, was overwhelmed. Her orders were constantly delayed, and her bookkeeping was a disaster. I spent 2 days in that bakery's back office, eating leftover croissants and turning her chaos into a system that worked. She paid me in 2 checks, one bounced, but I didn't care. She cried when I handed her a neat, color-coded binder that made her life easier. She told her cousin, who ran a dry cleaning business. Then that cousin told a friend, who ran a landscaping company. One by one, word spread, not because I had a sleek logo or a massive ad campaign, but because I actually helped people breathe again in their own businesses. I worked 18-hour days, taking calls in my bathrobe, holding client meetings over a second-hand laptop, and collapsing each night onto the thin mattress I'd pulled from a thrift store down the block. I didn't have an office or a team yet, but I had purpose. Every small win felt like a revolution. Every satisfied client felt like a middle finger to everyone who said I was finished, to every voice that had told me to lower my standards or settle for less. My bank account started growing, not fast, not dramatically, but steadily enough that I could afford a better mattress, a decent chair, a real desk. I still ate ramen, but now it came with a soft-boiled egg and some chopped scallions, because little luxuries like that start to feel like victories when you're clawing your way up from zero. And somewhere in the background, the universe decided to play its own little symphony. Because while I was building in the shadows, Mark was crashing in the spotlight. His new venture, a smug little tech startup he had hyped all over social media, was floundering. The app didn't work, the investors were pulling out, and apparently, Amanda had started dating one of his business partners. Oh, how poetic. He'd bet everything on an idea that looked good on paper, but had no soul behind it, and now it was collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. I didn't laugh, not out loud, anyway, but I did feel something deliciously satisfying in knowing that while he was spiraling, I was rising, quietly and powerfully. By the end of that first year, I had 12 steady clients, 3 part-time contractors helping me handle overflow work, and a spreadsheet that showed, for the first time in what felt like forever, a future that didn't look like survival, but something close to success. That's when I knew it was time to stop thinking small. I renamed the business, gave it a new identity, one that reflected exactly what I'd been doing all along without even realizing it. I called it Phoenix Rise Consulting, because that's what I was. Burned down to ash, written off by everyone, left to rot in the wreckage, and yet still, I rose. And as soon as I rebranded, something shifted. Investors started reaching out, small-time angel funders who had heard about me through the grapevine, wanting to know what I was building, where it was going, how they could be part of it. I didn't have answers yet, not all of them, but I had one hell of a story, and for the first time, people wanted to listen. I wasn't just another woman scorned. I was the woman who didn't just survive. I built something bigger in the dark, and now the light was finally coming. 3 years after that first shaky consulting gig, after the ramen dinners and sleepless nights and endless days where I pushed myself beyond exhaustion just to prove I still had something left to give, everything about my life looked different, so radically, unrecognizably different that sometimes I had to sit in silence just to process how far I'd come and how far away the wreckage of my past now felt. I wasn't working from a one-bedroom apartment anymore, hunched over a second-hand laptop on a wobbly table surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the smell of burnt toast. No, now I walked into my own office buildings, 2 of them, to be exact, one downtown and one just outside the city, both sleek, polished, humming with energy and ambition, filled with the kind of people who once wouldn't have returned my calls, but now hung on every word I spoke in meetings. I had 30 employees on payroll, sharp, driven professionals who believed in the vision I'd created from nothing but pain and grit. Some of them were people no one else had taken a chance on, people like me, discarded and overlooked, and I made sure they knew they had value from the moment they stepped through my doors. My company wasn't just a business anymore, it was a movement, a reminder that you could be underestimated, mocked, even destroyed, and still rise so far above the noise that the same people who laughed at your downfall would one day pay just to be in your presence. Phoenix Rise Consulting had gone from a side hustle built out of desperation to a powerhouse operation with clients across multiple industries, including 2 Fortune 500 corporations whose names I used to hear whispered in rooms I could never afford to enter. I'd walk into those boardrooms now in tailored suits, heels clicking on marble floors, with contracts in my hand and power in my voice, and I'd watch the way people looked at me, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect. And when the meetings ended, I didn't take the bus anymore. I walked out to my black Range Rover parked in the executive lot, slid into the leather seat, and drove back to a home I owned, outright on a hill overlooking the city, where the view alone reminded me every single night that I'd earned all of it, every inch, every dollar, every breath of freedom. And while I soared, the universe seemed to turn its back on the very people who once kicked me while I was down. Mark's startup had gone under within a year of my rebrand, collapsing under the weight of debt, poor management, and the sheer incompetence of a man who thought charm could substitute for substance. Lawsuits followed, employees suing for unpaid wages, investors threatening legal action, creditors knocking on his door. He filed for bankruptcy, moved into a small rental house, and last I heard, Amanda had left him for someone 10 years younger and significantly richer. She'd drained him dry, just like he'd once tried to do to me, and now he was nothing more than a bitter footnote in a story he thought he'd written. Erica, my sister, the one who once looked down at me with that condescending smirk, who told me to lower my standards and stop dreaming so big, had gone through her own personal implosion. Her husband walked out, took the savings, and left her scrambling for child support. She lost her job during a round of corporate layoffs, couldn't keep up with the mortgage, and was now living in a rental with peeling paint and a leaky ceiling, the same kind of place she once mocked me for staying in. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, not since the day she said, "You think you're better than everyone now, don't you?" But people like Erica always come back when they need something, and sure enough, one morning I opened my email to find a message sitting quietly in my inbox, its subject line painfully familiar and casually desperate. "Hi Claire. I heard you're hiring. I'd love to reconnect. Hope you're well." I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit there, like a relic from another life, while I finished my espresso and reviewed proposals from new partners in Seattle and Austin. Later that afternoon, I opened a file I kept on my desktop, one I'd created a while back, though I never told anyone about it. The folder was labeled Applications, Special Cases. And inside it was a list, neatly organized, quietly waiting. A list of names. Names of people who once mocked me, ignored me, betrayed me, laughed at me when I was at my lowest. Not out of obsession, not out of pettiness, but because I knew, deep down, life always loops back around, and I wanted to be ready when it did. There was Mark's name, Amanda's, Erica's, a couple of former colleagues who used to whisper behind my back in the staff kitchen. Even an old friend who told me she couldn't be around someone with such negative energy when I was crying on her couch after losing everything. I didn't know what I'd do with those names when I first typed them out, but now, staring at that list while the hum of my office buzzed around me, I felt something shift. The time was coming. The moment I'd always secretly envisioned, when I'd have the power to decide who got a seat at my table and who would be left standing outside. And something about that power didn't just feel good. It felt earned. It started with a quiet knock on the office door, one of those soft, hesitant taps you recognize instantly as the sound of someone who's not sure if they even belong in the building. I was standing by the window in my corner office, sipping black coffee and watching the morning sun stretch across the skyline when my assistant walked in with a raised eyebrow and a half smirk. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding out a clipboard like it contained classified information. I took it, and there they were, the names, one after another, scribbled on our application forms, printed in the same hopeful tone I'd seen from hundreds of other job seekers. But this time, these weren't strangers looking for a chance. These were ghosts from my past, dragging their pride behind them like broken luggage, suddenly desperate for entry into the very empire they once treated like a joke. I walked down the hallway toward the main lobby, heels clicking sharply against polished tile, each step echoing like a reminder that I was no longer the woman they remembered, the one they mocked, pitted, dismissed, and discarded. When I turned the corner, I saw them. A full line, stretching out of the waiting area, down the hallway, past the elevator, dressed in wrinkled suits, clutching resumes in cheap leather folders, eyes darting nervously between the receptionist and the glass doors. And among them, plain as day, was Erica, my sister, wearing a dated blazer, her roots showing through her hair dye, hands fidgeting with the corner of her resume like she couldn't believe she was really standing in my lobby. Behind her stood Alan, one of Mark's old drinking buddies who used to make snide little remarks about me at dinner parties. There was Katie, a former coworker who once called me emotionally fragile in a staff meeting like I wasn't even in the room. And there were others too, people I hadn't thought about in years, people who, in some way or another, helped drive the knife in deeper when I was already bleeding out. Now they were lined up, staring through the glass with forced smiles and plastic confidence, hoping I wouldn't remember the roles they played in my collapse. I didn't rush into the room. I took my time, letting them sweat in those uncomfortable chairs, watching the minutes tick by without updates. I wanted them to feel what it was like to wait, to wonder, to sit in a place where they didn't know if they were good enough. My assistant whispered, "Should we move the interviews forward?" I shook my head slowly. "Let them marinate a little longer," I said, and went back to my office. I sat behind my desk, flipped open the special cases file, and started organizing the applications one by one, adding little notes next to each name, not about their skills, not about their experience, but about who they used to be when they thought I had nothing left. An hour later, I called the first name Erica. She walked in slowly, her smile forced, her voice a little too cheery, the way people sound when they're trying to pretend nothing ever happened. "Claire," she said, sitting down across from me, "I can't even tell you how proud I am of you. Really, what you've built, it's amazing." I nodded, kept my expression calm, even friendly. I asked about her resume, her work experience, her last role. I asked questions I already knew the answers to because I'd looked into her situation weeks ago. Then I closed the folder slowly and looked her in the eyes. "Tell me something," I said. Do you remember the conversation we had in your kitchen? The one where you told me I should lower my standards and take what I could get? Her face froze for a moment, but she recovered quickly, forced a small laugh. Claire, come on. That was years ago. You were in a bad place, and I was just trying to help you see things realistically. Right, I said, still calm. Well, here's a dose of realism for you. I'm not hiring you. The silence was sharp, heavy, almost satisfying. She blinked a few times, leaned forward, lowered her voice. Are you serious? She said. Claire, this is ridiculous. You'd really turn down your own sister when I'm just trying to get back on my feet. I didn't say I was turning you down, I replied. I said I'm not hiring you. There's a difference. You can stay on the waiting list. Maybe something will open up in a few months, entry level, of course. She stood up, face flushed with embarrassment, and walked out without another word. And as she passed the others waiting in the hallway, I could see the panic setting in, the realization that maybe none of them were going to get what they came for. One by one, I interviewed them all. And for most, I offered exactly what they used to offer me: pity, fake smiles, and empty words. Some of them cried. Some of them got angry. A few begged. And a couple tried to pretend the past never happened, as if time had wiped the slate clean and I should just forget what they'd done. But I hadn't forgotten a single word. Every slight, every backhanded comment, every dismissive glance, it was all etched in stone, and now it was finally paying me back in a currency they could understand. And then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, my assistant walked in again, holding a folder in her hands and a strange look on her face. He's here, she said quietly. Mark. I looked up slowly, heart steady, mind sharp, fingers resting gently on the edge of my desk. Tell him to wait, I said. He'll be next. He walked in like he still owned the room, like the past 3 years hadn't dismantled him piece by piece, like the smirk on his face could still buy him the upper hand. Mark always had that way about him, that infuriating confidence that clung to him even when everything was falling apart around him, as if arrogance alone could bend the world in his favor. But this time, it didn't hit the same. This time, his swagger looked like a poorly rehearsed performance, and the fine lines around his eyes and the tightness in his jaw betrayed just how desperate he really was. He stood in front of my desk, holding a manila folder in one hand and an awkward half-smile on his face, like he wasn't sure if he should play humble or charming, or maybe both at once. Claire, he said, voice just a little too smooth, it's good to see you. You look incredible. Really. I didn't bother returning the compliment. I didn't need to. I leaned back in my chair, fingers laced in front of me, watching him try to pretend this was just a normal job interview, as if we were two strangers with no history, no scars, no fire behind our eyes. He handed me his resume, typed in a generic template, padded with buzzwords, filled with empty titles that meant nothing outside his failed startup and short-term freelance gigs that clearly hadn't gone anywhere. I've been following what you've built, he said, settling into the chair across from me like he belonged there. Phoenix Rise, it's impressive. Honestly, I'm proud of you. Not that I ever doubted you. I raised one eyebrow slowly, letting the silence sit between us for a moment longer than was comfortable. Not even when you told everyone I was emotionally unstable and ruined your life? I asked, keeping my tone steady, almost bored. He shifted in his seat, chuckled nervously. Come on, Claire. We both said things during the divorce we didn't mean. You know how it gets. I was angry. You were angry. No, Mark, I said, voice low but sharp, you were cruel. You took everything you could, then stood by while people dragged my name through the dirt, and you never once stepped in to tell the truth. You let your girlfriend, my best friend, laugh at me in public while you played the victim and moved on with your life like I never existed. He looked down for a second, but not long. He was still trying to salvage whatever dignity he had left. I'm not proud of how things ended, he said, quietly. But I'm trying to start fresh. I need this job, Claire. I just need a chance. And there it was, the moment I'd replayed in my head 100 times over the years, the scene I thought would feel like the ultimate high, the moment I'd finally get to crush him beneath the same weight he once dropped on me. I had imagined shouting, gloating, maybe even laughing in his face. But now that it was here, I didn't feel any of that. I just felt done. I opened his resume, glanced through it again without really reading, then slowly closed the folder and set it on the desk. You know, I said softly, I've got an opening on our facilities team, janitorial support, part-time, hourly wage. Nothing glamorous. You'd start in the basement offices, night shift, mostly trash collection and maintenance requests. His mouth twitched like he couldn't tell if I was joking or insulting him. You're offering me a janitor job? I'm offering you an opportunity, I replied calmly. You said you needed a fresh start. That's how I started, scrubbing toilets in places that wouldn't even look me in the eye. He laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. You're punishing me. No, I said, standing slowly. I'm reminding you how it feels to rebuild from nothing. You can take the job or walk away. Either way, I'll be fine. He stood, folder clenched tightly in his hand, jaw flexing. You've changed, he said, almost under his breath. Damn right I have, I answered. Pain does that to people. It sharpens us, strips away everything soft until there's only steel left. He left without another word, and I watched through the glass as he passed the front desk, shoulders a little lower than when he came in. And just like that, it was over. No screaming, no fireworks, no grand finale. Just a quiet closing of a door I should have slammed shut years ago. That night, I sat in my penthouse, glass of wine in hand, lights from the city flickering across the floor like scattered memories, and I tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Triumph? Closure? But mostly, I just felt empty. Revenge is a funny thing. It feeds you, fuels you, keeps you alive when nothing else can. But once you've swallowed it whole, you start wondering what's left to chase. I had the power now. I had the empire. I had every single thing they once told me I'd never have again. But the truth is, the fire that built it all didn't come from proving them wrong. It came from refusing to let their voices be the last ones I heard. And maybe I didn't need to win for them to lose. Maybe I just needed to rise high enough that their opinions couldn't touch me anymore. I took one last sip of wine, set the glass down, and turned off the city lights behind me. Tomorrow was a new day. Another meeting, another expansion, another step forward. But somewhere deep inside, I still heard that quiet voice whispering, you didn't just get even. You got ahead.